One of the things that makes local flowers so special, especially for our customers who love flowers, is the fact that our flowers are ever changing. Some of these flowers feel like that they are very ephemeral and only last for a couple of weeks, while others have a much longer bloom time and duration. This can be both good and bad for us as flower farmers. And in year one of the things that I really struggled with was making sure that I had consistency in blooms. I found that in some parts of the season, especially in the spring as well as in the fall, sometimes I was left without blooms. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a week by week snapshot of what my bouquets look like. And we're going to talk about a little bit of the watch outs for certain times of the year when you really need to be diligent about crop planting, certain parts of the year where you can kind of take your foot off of the gas pedal and take a step back because you know you're going to have an abundance of blooms. And we're just going to enjoy what the bouquets look like and hopefully have some fun going through photos. One of the reasons why I am creating this video is because I am shifting basically all of my sales next year to retail. So I'm going to be making a lot more mixed bouquets. And I always like to look at my season from different angles. So one of the things I also did was looked at my productivity from a flower level, looking at it from a square foot yield, and then looking at how many bouquets that a particular flower contribute to. So if you're interested in that kind of nerdy details, I do have a Patreon post on those numbers. So I break down my backbone flowers for all of the months that I'm going to show here. And I also talk about how many bouquets I sold in addition to how many bouquets those specific flowers contributed to. So for $5 a month, you can access that. That is a post that is kind of like a 3-part series. I have another post around the square foot yield, which also has a video accompanying that here if you haven't seen that yet, as well as another post on Patreon of an aerial view of my field through the months so that you can see just how much space it took to grow the flowers that we're going to talk about today. So let's get started. We're going to start with the month of June. I don't really have much in the months of April and May because I only really grow tulips that time of year. In 2025, I hope to change that by having some more flowers in May, but I really didn't have enough consistency in May to put something together. Let's start off with the month of June, which is one of my favorite months for cut flowers. Specifically because it feels like I can get a lot without putting in a ton of work. If you've been following me for a while, you'll know how much I love perennials in June. The watch out in June is the fact that if you are newer to flower farming or you haven't been in your space for a long time, you may not be able to have access to a focal that you grow. So of course, it depends on the climate that you live in. If you live in a warm climate, you're certainly going to be able to have a warm loving annual type of focal at that time. But if you live in the northern climates like me in New Jersey, you are going to be stuck without a focal. So for me, my focal of choice is the lily. I actually perennialize lilies, and throughout parts of the season, I also will force lilies. So you'll see lilies being a main focal for me, but other people will have things like peonies or even roses. So there's a lot of different options that you can choose from. The point is actually thinking about what your focal is going to be in June if you want those consistent blooms. The other thing about June is the fact that there's a ton of general perennials that are not focals that you can leverage, right? So when I think about June, I think about all of this output I'm going to get from all of the perennials. And then what are some of the annuals that I want to start in order to enhance those bouquets. So let's actually take a deeper dive into this week by week. This is a photo from June 7th. You can see I have some lilies in there. These are LA hybrids. I think they give a really good pop of orange in these bouquets. I've got some filler like mountain mint. My first stems of mountain mint are just starting to come in here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Got some sea holly also starting to come in. This is a bouquet completely powered by perennials. Just a week later, on June 13th, we've now got the addition of things like yarrow as well as Persian cress. Now, Persian cress is an annual. It's something that I've grown a couple of times. I don't necessarily love growing it because it needs to be netted. It's a low value crop, but one cannot deny the fact that it definitely provides some sort of interest to the bouquets in a way that no other flower is going to give that to me. But you can see that the bouquets are starting to get a little bit more interesting as a whole, right? Because there's more variety in there. By the time we get to June 20th, my annuals have started coming in, and specifically Bells of Ireland, which I grew for the first time and loved and will be growing again next year. I think that the Bells of Ireland add this amazing pop of chartreuse green to the bouquets, and they also are just such a unique shape that it's really hard to have any other type of flower make up for that type of unique interest. But again, lilies are a mainstay here, and I do want to point out this gorgeous double white here called Belvedere. It is actually completely pollenless and scentless, so it's a really great option if you're looking for a unique focal that other people haven't seen, because I can guarantee you people are not going to be able to find this type of lily at their grocery store or Target, Walmart bouquet, wherever it is they buy their imported bouquets from. And then on June 29th, you can see that really it's very similar to the other weeks, but now we have an addition of another annual, and we have some Chinese forget-me-nots. So again, a new flower that I grew from seed this year just to trial. I had gotten some free seed, and I really did love the type of interest it added to the bouquet. It's just not a flower I would grow again, because just it wilts a little bit easily. When it goes to seed, it like gets all over the place. So I think that there's probably other types of annuals I could grow in its place. And I think that the takeaway I had this past season in June was that I can really rely on my perennials to make really great June bouquets, but I do want to have a few annuals in there that have a bit of airiness in order for me to give that extra oomph to the bouquet that I really like. So that's June. And I would say that for anyone who's in year one, June can actually be a really difficult time. I actually just did a video last week talking about how in year one, I got blooms a lot later than I thought I would. And I was signed up for a farmer's market. I didn't really get many blooms until later June. If I got blooms, they were very inconsistent. I was able to make like 3 bouquets, and really, you know, you're trying to at least make like 10 to 20 bouquets a week at the minimum if you're selling them. If you're going to a farmer's market, you know, you might need like 20, 30 bouquets. So if that's you, you've signed up for a farmer's market, make sure you have a plan B, that you have some sort of like local grower where you can source flowers from, or you're selling something else so that you're not sitting there with an empty booth at the farmer's market. I think that June is also a time when things go from 0 to 100 really, really quickly. So in the beginning of June, you might have a little bit of trouble in terms of putting together bouquets. By the end of the month, where I am in 7A, it is just like hotcakes. Like things are coming up all over, and you're gonna have a hard time keeping up with the harvest. But let's actually go to July, which tends to be a slower month in terms of sales, but a more productive month in terms of flowers. So again, the purpose of this video is to see how flowers change, and specifically the flowers that I grew and how that changed what the bouquets look like. So here's a photo from right after the July 4th weekend. This is not my most proud type of bouquets. You can see that I'm actually lacking a bit of focals here. I have some rose lilies in here that were a little bit just before they started blooming. These are going to open and bud up beautifully, but from a just perception and like wow factor, you're obviously not getting that just by picking up the bouquet. The customer would have to wait in their home for those rose lilies to bloom, but it's going to give them a fantastic vase life. So you can see I did struggle with having some open focals, and I did not do any zinnias until after July 4th. That was very strategic. So for a lot of people in my zone, they should have zinnias at this time, but I was relying on something like a lizzianthus, which doesn't bloom until much later in July, even for the earlier groups. So it's very, very filler heavy in these bouquets. And mountain mint is something I want to come back to, because mountain mint blooms over a month where I am. If you are cutting the earliest stems, you need to make sure they're hydrated well so that they don't wilt. But by the time you get to July, they definitely don't wilt on you. So what I've really been prioritizing is figuring out what are some of the fillers like mountain mint where I put it in and it can actually bridge the gap or it can actually bridge me from one month to another. So I don't ever have to think about growing more fillers from an annual perspective. So mountain mint does that for me. Another filler is actually baptisia. So I have yet to use Baptisia that's come from my own field, but I put in some Baptisia plants last year, so I'm hoping that they will give me blooms. I also have some Agistache in the ground too. In landscaping, the deer are not touching that. So I'm really hoping that this upcoming season, I can focus more on the fun annuals that I want to grow versus having to focus on filler. And that way, if I'm not harvesting all of the filler, like for example, the mountain mint, I have like over 100 mountain mint plants. I'm not going to need all of them, but that's totally fine because when I need them, they will be there, and things like mint can go into my landscaping so they're not taking up a ton of room in the field. So that was July 4th. Of note here, I do have some sunflowers, some callus starting to come in here, and I will be growing more sunflowers in 2025. But just a week later, July 13th, you can see more of my lilies have started coming back in. So at this point, I'm relying on lilies that I've been forcing, meaning that I am planting sometime in April. When I perennialize these will all come up during their natural blooming time frame, which is sometime in like June. So if you want lilies beyond this like June-ish window, you have to be forcing them and ordering bulbs and planting them repeatedly. I also have dill coming up, and dill I think is such a wonderful addition to bouquets. We use dill for culinary purposes at home, so to me it makes total sense for me to plant some dill for both cut flower production, and if I don't need it for the cut flowers, at least we're able to use it at home for things like brining pickles, making sour cream, a dill dip for a salmon dish, right? There's plenty of uses for it. A week later, on July 19th, you can see the rose lilies are really starting to pop. I love the rose lilies. They do have a bit of a scent to them. So for people who are super, super sensitive to lily scent, it may not be for them. But again, this is like a really unique focal that people are not going to see at their local grocery store bouquet. You can see a little bit of feverfew in here. I had a thrips issue with feverfew, so didn't get a ton of it, but still some. And unfortunately, this is the last week where I had bells of Ireland. So I found that bells of Ireland actually produced for me for about a full month, which was really great. And that's a reason why I'm growing them again next year, except I'm trying to time them to come a little bit earlier. I found that the bells that were growing in July were a bit stunted in growth because it just got too hot over here. So I'm overwintering bells of Ireland, hoping to get them a couple weeks earlier and hopefully also with longer stems. A week after that, July 23rd, this is actually the bouquet I brought to Farmer Bailey's Grow and Show little tour that he had. He had people submit bouquets just for fun, and we did like a little show and voted for the best bouquet. But I didn't have a ton, but yet I still felt like I was able to put a bouquet together. So I had mountain mint, I had some lilies. The first of my cosmos were coming in, as well as Lisianthus. So again, like late July is where that Lisianthus starts coming in for me. And you can see on July 31st, last week of July, my arena apricot Lisianthus were finally starting to come in. And so right before that, my Chateau Lisianthus was peaking at its prime. So I would say July 23rd to July 31st was where I got my group 2 Lisianthus coming in here in New Jersey. So July is a time of year where, at least here in the US, a lot of people go on vacation. It's the summer months. Tends to be slow. If you live in a touristy region, it might actually be a high peak point for you, but it's all about where you live, your market. For me personally, it just doesn't make sense to grow that much in July. So I tend to focus my efforts in July more on preparing for the fall. But you can see I still have bouquets for sale, and next year I will still have bouquets for sale at that local country store. So I don't think I'm going to do too much differently in July. The one difference is that I'm not forcing lilies in this upcoming season. One of the main contributors to that is the fact that I have something called a scarlet lily beetle, which is a really annoying pest. And the amount of time I spent scouting for that pest and managing it was just really not worth it for me. So especially in a time like July where I can get other annual focals, I'm going to go that route. So we're probably going to rely on things like zinnias. I also have some perennial echinacea that is in the ground that I'm hoping will also flower at that time. Those are like the summer echinacea. So we'll see how they do. But I do think that there's a lot more variety and choice that I have during that time through annuals that I don't need to focus on lilies. So now that brings us into later summer, the month of August. In August, I felt like I had this abundance and that the flower farm looked great and it wasn't even starting to peak yet. So August 9th, this is actually a shot of one of my CSA premium vase arrangements. Rose lilies, Lisianthus were the focus of this bouquet. I had some filler like celosia coming in. So this is all self-seeded celosia. The only celosia I planted or I direct seeded this year was actually from the Florette series. Talk a little bit more about that afterwards. But all the flamingo feather here is completely just is completely self-seeded. And here are some other photos of the same CSA vase arrangement pickup using very similar flowers. In a week later, we're on to August 17th. These are some retail bouquets that I provided for the local store. And you can see, again, some of the same flowers I talked about, but now we actually have the addition of ageratum coming in. And so these ageratum were planted from plugs back in early July, and they really started coming into peak production about a month and a half later. So actually, I would even say August 17th wasn't peak. It was more like September became really, really peak. And because I planted them in different parts of the field, I actually naturally got succession planting from them because there are microclimates in a field. Even if it's as flat as this 40 by 90 foot space, I still had different timing in terms of bloom. So that's another reason why you might not want to row crop all in one area. You might want to spread it out a little bit. But I really want to focus your attention on this green flower on the side. This is called curcuma. This was a new flower that I planted. They grow from little, I don't even know what they're called. They might be called tubers or rhizomes, but they're kind of like dahlias in the sense that you put them in the ground. They take a little bit of time to get started. Once they start growing, they shoot up these beautiful flowers, and you dig up these bulbs or tubers, and then you can plant more next year because they will have divided. These bulbs came from Ampersand Bulb Company. They were really unique. All my customers really loved them. I would say the production was a little bit on the lower side than what I would have liked, but they thrive in high humidity. So in the months of July and August where we have high humidity, they do really, really well. So I actually dug some up. I kept some in the ground to see if they would still pop up again next year, and we'll see what happens. By August 23rd, you can see that I'm still having Lisianthus in here. At this point, I felt like I was swimming in them and they were my main focal. I still have some lilies in my bouquets, and honestly, I didn't need lilies at all at this time. I wasn't going down to the cooperative as much because of where we were in my daughter's diagnosis and treatment process, so therefore I had more to use in my bouquets. But you can see Lisianthus, and now some of the dahlias are starting to come in, and they really start coming in by the next week, which is now August 31st. So here's some Cornell bronze dahlias. I find that with my dahlias, they tend to all have these buds. They bloom around the same time. You cut them off, and then you have to wait like another 2 weeks for that plant to produce more buds. But let's pause here for the month of August, because I think August is a time when some people feel burnt out if they haven't been pacing themselves properly. There's just a lot of blooms coming in, and there can also be a lot of weed management that needs to happen. So if you're burnt out in August, what it means is that you may not actually have a great fall, which is a missed opportunity. But at the same time, I think that if you do your planning well, you can still have a really good August. Because if you think about where a lot of the work was done for me in August, it was done in the months of April and May for the Lisianthus. I think that those are like the high intensity months of Lisianthus, because one, you're planting them, and then two, you're weeding them to make sure that they're not getting overweeded. So perhaps there's a bit of June we're also doing weeding maintenance, but once they get to a certain height and they're bushing out a little bit with their leaves, the weed management issue doesn't become as much of a problem. So I find that by the time you get to like July, you can really take a step back from Lisianthus and not have to worry about them. I have a bunch of celosia in here, which self-seeded, so didn't have to do any work. In order for me to have gotten cosmos at this time, that means I would have had to see those in June. And I mentioned earlier that the ageratum plugs were put in July. And even the last photo over here, I didn't mention, you can see some marigolds starting to come in, and those were also put in July. So when I think about August, it's a time where you can be overwhelmed, but at the same time, you can also take your foot off the gas pedal, because a lot of the succession planting that you would have need to have done is basically done at that point. For us in August, you might be able to get another crop of sunflowers in, but it really is tricky because the day length is starting to shorten and the temperatures at night are starting to cool. So you're not going to get as that rapid growth as you typically do in the summer. And that now brings us to September. I would say that September was the peak, the prime of my flower farm, because I had planned it that way. And so on September 7th, you can see the colors really starting to change. They still feel summery, but because we have new flowers coming in, the vibe feels a little bit different. I felt like the summer was a little bit more like chic, refined because of the lisianthus. In September, they're starting to get a little bit more playful, but still looking specialty because of dahlias. So we've got cosmos, dahlias. There's actually a little bit of asters in here, which I haven't grown super well, but still got a viable crop out of them. I'm going to try more asters again next year. And we also have some stock in the background. So it's hard to see on September 7th, but on September 14th, you can start seeing more of the stock come in. You can see more of the marigolds really making a statement. I had grown 2 different types of cosmos, and the cupcake blush was starting to come in, so that really helped tone down the colors a bit. And I had some bicolor sunflowers that were also making their way into the bouquets. September 21st, I would say that the bouquets all look very similar to the weeks before. Got a couple of zinnias from the Floret series coming in here, as well as some more celosia. And September 27th, really similar colors too, except now we have a different color stock coming in. So in September, I would say that the bouquets were definitely unique from a local flower perspective. You typically don't see stock in the fall, even from local flower farmers here where I am, but clearly it's possible to grow them. Stock adds such a wonderful scent to bouquets that I would really love growing them whenever possible, because I really do think they enhance the bouquet. One of the critical feedback that I had for myself in September was I didn't have enough filler. And I think that filler does play an important role. So I feel like I lacked a bit of greenery here. I probably could have made it up with a little bit more cosmo greenery, but a lot of my cosmos actually gotten flattened by this point through storms. So I couldn't really use the greenery as much as I should have been able to. So I feel like I was missing some green, and I had to use a few more extra premium stems, things like dahlias or marigolds, in order for a bouquet to feel relatively full. I see the types of vases that my customers use, and a lot of customers like to use open face vases, which inherently means that you need some sort of bulk to make it feel like that there's enough in that vase to have like a proper shape. Because if you're only doing like 10, 12 stems and they're using a vase like that, it doesn't feel very full. And of course, like I can't control what type of vase my customers are using, but what I'm really trying to say here is that I could definitely grow some more filler type of flowers for the month of September so that I can make more bouquets with the same amount of focals. And then that brings us to October. The context here is that I felt like I had a ton of flowers, but I wasn't able to keep up with the harvest because of my daughter's treatment. And at the end of the day, I had invited another flower farmer locally to come and cut. So we had a lot of flowers to go around, which was awesome. And I'm actually really proud that we made it to mid-October. So you can see October 5th, here are some of the same flowers that we had, but the same flowers in different color tones. So for example, cosmos, here are the apricot lemonade variety, and I had actually gotten these from plugs from Farmer Bailey's back in late July, so they flowered by October. So my succession planning with cosmos was May, June, July, have 3 successions, and that carried me through to October. The marigolds were coming in. I had more dahlias coming in. At this point, finally, some of my celosia from Florette was coming in. The limonada is in here. I also grew some of the dusty rose, which is shown over here. And those actually came in September, and I had some in October. And I also had calla lilies, my last succession of calla lilies. So you might have seen the callas come in earlier successions. I sold a lot of those wholesale. And I really love the fact that I had so many callas for October because we had started getting frost. And even though callas are not supposed to be frost tolerant, many of mine actually handled frost like a champ. So callas are really, really long lasting in a vase. And they gave me confidence that at least the marigolds, the callas would do really well in those bouquets, even though I had things like cosmos and zinnias. That was October 5th. October 10th, I actually got a special order from someone who wanted just like really mini bouquets for a little party that she had. And she had like a specific color palette that was burgundy pink. So all of these colors fit really well in there. You can see some more pink callas in here, as well as that Florette Dusty Rose celosia that I was talking about. I was actually really proud that I was able to put this together on October 10th and still have the amount of variety to make the bouquets feel interesting. By October 12th, things really started puttering out. You can see the marigolds are starting to get like really open centers. Anytime you start seeing flowers get open centers, it's a sign that they're ending their lifestyle stage. They're trying to create seed. They're trying to make it easier for things to pollinate in order for them to make seed. So you typically see that in marigolds and especially dahlias. You'll find that later season dahlias don't have as tight of a closed center because of that. And then by October 17th, we were really starting to putter out. Ironically, I started getting some second flushes of my spring perennials like sea holly. I had some other filler like silver shield come in, but overall I would say that this was like the last week where the dahlias really started puttering out. So when I reflect back on October, I felt like that I was still riding this wave that I had from September. And it was really this wave that was made possible by the fact that the days and nights are not as hot anymore. So therefore flowers still have a little bit, they have more longevity to them. They have a little bit more buffer in terms of when you can harvest. When it's really hot outside, that buffer in terms of when you can harvest is not just limited to the early and evening hours of the day, but because it's so hot, that flower is in rapid growth. When it starts cooling down at night in the fall, you basically have the flower slowing down. So all types of flowers will basically have a longer harvest window. And that's also why I like focusing more on fall more, because having more buffer to harvest, especially if you're doing this part-time, just gives you a lot more ability to be able to get usable, sellable stems from all the work that you are putting into these flowers. So what does this mean for 2025? I am the type of person who loves to experiment, who loves to grow some new things, but obviously also stay the course of things that went really well. So let's actually break this down by month. I talked about in June, going to stay the course with perennials, figure out a couple of annuals that I want to grow to get that bouquet to the next level. July and August are actually all going to be about the Lisianthus. I have about, I would say, 600 plants of Lisianthus coming in, which is a lot more than I need. And I'm probably just going to grow cosmos alongside with them. I find that cosmos and Lisianthus, especially if you can grow the cosmos really well, actually are really great pair, and they can actually give you a pretty big perceived value for a bouquet. And having just 2 types of flowers in there obviously makes things more efficient. For the months of September through October, I definitely want to make sure that we have dahlias as well as some marigolds, but I also want to look at some other things like celosia. I want to grow a bigger variety of celosia, and I think that I can still achieve really interesting with huge variety of flowers in a bouquet through having different types of celosia. Because if you think about it, there's like plume celosia, there's feathered celosia, there's coxcomb, there's so many different types of celosia. I think it'd be interesting to grow all these different types, see how they do in a bouquet, and then have a couple of focals such as like the dahlias, as well as maybe zinnias during that time frame. So I think that my bouquets from June, July are going to look very similar to the bouquets this year. But I do think that my bouquets later in the season, especially as we head to late summer through early fall, are going to start looking different. And we're going to have a pretty big focus on sunflowers, especially later in the season. I hope this was as fun for you to watch and look at the progression of blooms over time as it was for me to put together. Let me know if there's any other flowers I should be considering for next year. My crop planning is not finalized. And in the meantime, here's a quick update on E. You want more flowers? You want to open?
No.
Twist!